And welcome back to Part 2 of the AntiGynocentrist essay on the normalization of Gynocentrism. Last time I gave you items 1 through 5 in a list of 10 reasons that Gynocentrism has been normalized in our society. The reasons covered the influence of women, the change in family structure, the prosperity of modern civilization, virtue signaling, and the proliferation of gynocentric superstimuli and mass communication. I will not tarry, but will instead move on directly with the remaining items on the list, starting with number 6, the gynocentric mainstream media. Following on from the previous section, the mainstream media plays a key role in normalizing gynocentrism. The gynocentric vomit coming out daily from major news outlets is a constant. We have articles titled, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" linked from the Washington Post, and "The End of Men" linked from the Atlantic. Imagine for a moment if we substituted men with Jews in such articles. Such material would not look out of place in Nazi propaganda. Men are being dehumanized by the media, and the media are spreading outrageous bigotry that would never be tolerated if the sexes were reversed. The media has shown time and time again they are pushing a gynocentric and female supremacist narrative onto society. They have ceased being news outlets and now essentially spread feminist and gynocentric man-hating propaganda. The media shapes the attitudes and beliefs of society and also shapes politics and propaganda. It works, as we have seen from numerous examples throughout history. We are fortunate now to have an alternative media finally rising up against this hatred of men, to challenge it directly. AVFM is one example of this. However, the mainstream media has had a multi-decade head start on the alternative media to shape society and still has considerable influence, despite their failing subscriptions and viewers. Number 7, reductionism. There is a reductionist bent in society to not look at the bigger picture. We often fail to see the connection between things and how things are interrelated in society. There's a tendency to assign responsibility or consequence to one thing, person, or cause. This feeds not just into normalizing gynocentrism, but into letting other problems in society grow too. Society is a system, and systems theory would help enormously in understanding and correctly dealing with societal problems, particularly social problems. Taking a holistic and systems approach to understanding the world can be far more effective than perceiving the world solely through a reductionist lens. Take school shootings, for example. We could prevent such tragedies from occurring if we bothered to take a holistic systems-based perspective on the problem. Instead of blaming it all on toxic masculinity, how about we look at fatherlessness and mental health? As society becomes more and more connected, taking a holistic systems-based approach to addressing social problems is going to be more and more relevant. When we examine the behavior of men and women in society, it is often solely discussed and framed along gynocentric lines by the media and by the culture. We look at men's behavior toward women in isolation from women. We do not even consider women are agents in society, and we fail to see how the behavior of men and women toward the opposite sex feed back on each other. The feminist narrative on domestic violence is one such example of this. Domestic violence is often reciprocal in nature, linked, and yet we do not hear on the reciprocal nature of domestic violence. When we hear about men's violence towards women only, its causes are framed along the lines of power and control by the feminist Duluth model. No other cause or factor is apparently at play in contributing to men's violence. The role of alcohol, substance abuse, poverty, mental illness, and abuse during childhood is all overlooked and ignored. When society fosters a reductionist perspective on looking at the world and does not consider a holistic or systems perspective, it encourages gynocentrism to grow and spread. Gynocentrism is, by its nature, reductionist. having one-dimensional perspective of relating everything solely to how they impact women and girls. It is much easier to spread and normalize in a society that is highly politically polarized and has a general reductionist mindset to looking at the world that is encouraged by ideologues in the media and academia. Even in biology and the sciences, we can see how reductionism holds back progress in understanding the natural world. Systems biology, linked, is a rapidly developing interdisciplinary field at the forefront of life science research that aims to go beyond a reductionist perspective, correct this limitation in scientific knowledge, and develop a more accurate holistic systems understanding of biology. Biology is complex and is comprised of multiple systems at multiple levels, from cell signaling pathways all the way up to entire ecosystems. When we examine what is required for evolutionary success and for genes to be successfully passed on from one generation to the next, it is not as simple as saying it is all about reproductive success. Reproduction is essential, but so is survival. An organism must survive to produce, and its offspring must survive to successfully mate. Otherwise, it would be as if the offspring were never produced in the first place. Reproducing once may not be sufficient either, and an organism may need to survive long enough to mate multiple times to ensure they produce enough offspring that survive to sexual maturity and pass on the genes. An organism must develop a strategy in investing energy, resources, and time in survival versus reproduction that is optimized to their environment and biology in order to guarantee evolutionary success. Evolutionary success is far more complex than simply just reproducing. If that were not the case, and reproduction was really all that mattered, then the only life that would have evolved on Earth would have been asexual microbial life. There are selective advantages for species that reproduce more slowly, but have a more complex biology that can better adapt to, tolerate, manipulate, and extract resources from the local environment. These selective advantages are partly what gave rise to the proliferation of multicellular life, linked. Think for a moment about the thousands of lineages that have continued their existence today because of the civilization and technological advances men have created and been responsible for. Think of the billions of people alive today because of the intrinsic value men have provided to society. There are entire lineages that would have been extinguished long ago and billions of people that would not have been born without the intrinsic value men have provided in creating the advanced civilization we enjoy and modern technology. Simply reproducing, especially for a slowly reproducing species like humans, is simply not enough to ensure evolutionary success. That is why men have been sexually and naturally selected to develop traits to enable them to provide, protect, discover, explore, invent, build, maintain, repair, and fight for society. It is not as simple as saying one man can reproduce with 10 women, therefore men are disposable. Biology is far more complex than that. Notice no one seems to consider how men can change the world and lead to an extra couple of 100 million people existing and passing on their genes. Think of the impact a handful of men in society have had on civilization over the last 2 centuries, and by extension, the evolutionary success of the species. Think of how many less people there would be without electricity, machinery, antibiotics, modern medicine, and modern agriculture that men were mostly responsible for. How many family genetic lineages have continued existing because of the technological advances by men and have avoided termination as a result? How many family genetic lineages have continued existing because of these technological advances by men and have avoided termination as a result? Successfully passing on the genes is not solely about sexual intercourse. Biology is more complex than that. Many other things have to occur before and after sexual intercourse to ensure genes are passed on successfully. The value men bring to survival of the community and to society is unique. Despite what feminists claim, women really cannot do everything a man can do or do it just as well. Women are not inferior. Men and women just have different strengths. Men remain the majority of our leading scientists, thinkers, inventors, political and business thinkers, etc., despite all the feminist social engineering to artificially lift women up. Human adult males are also not immediately replaceable either, especially talented and gifted men. It takes roughly 18 years before they reach physical maturity, 25 years if we're talking about the brain, and a great deal of parental investment compared to other animals. Our failure to recognize that treating men as disposable is to treat civilization as disposable will eventually lead to the implosion of civilization. Even if we consider men as machines, we all recognize what happens when you do not look after your car and do not change the oil. Either we unlearn the cultural belief that men are disposable, or we can watch society start falling apart. Adopting a holistic systems perspective and going beyond a simple reduction mode of thinking would help us unlearn the erroneous cultural belief that men are disposable. Number 8. Gynocentric authority, institutions, and herd mentality. Much of the influence in what shapes social behavior comes from the top of society and from authorities like the government and institutions like universities. Gynocentrism has been normalized in part because we have practiced it for centuries and our key institutions, leaders, celebrities, and elite practice it, endorse it, and impose it on the rest of us. We even enshrine gynocentrism into law. There have been a number of psychological studies since World War II showing how easily people blindly follow authority and rules. The infamous Zimbardo Stanford prison experiments, linked, being one such example, and how powerful institutional environments and rules are in shaping group and individual behavior. That partly explains a lot about how Nazism came to power and how millions of people were exterminated without anyone speaking out against it. The power of the herd mentality of human beings to follow authority and a minority of individuals cannot be underestimated. Many people simply do not think for themselves, and this reality allows a minority of people like feminists to easily control large groups of people once they hold positions of authority in institutions and government. Slavery was considered normal for centuries by our leaders, authorities, and institutions, and was widespread, as was barbaric punishment and torture. Only in the last 200 years or so, after wars and huge political movements and massive legal reform, have slavery and inhumane punishment been mostly abolished and outlawed. People had the same arguments about slavery being natural and inevitable in the past as people do today about gynocentrism. Just like back then, the arguments today about gynocentrism being inevitable do not have substance when you examine them more closely. This is the naturalistic fallacy in action. The fact gynocentrism has natural or biological underpinnings does not mean it is morally acceptable, desirable, inevitable, or a healthy expression of human behavior. The education system, out of all the institutions, plays a key role in normalizing gynocentrism. Many boys and girls in school can now go through most of their education, from kindergarten to postgraduate education, with few male teachers. The influence of feminist ideology is now present at the primary or elementary level and has been present at the university level for years. The education system has now essentially become a system of feminist indoctrination and gynocentrism. This sort of environment does have impacts on the behavior of children and the adults they will become. Like the changes in the family structure, the feminization of the education system has played a major role in spreading and promoting gynocentrism in society. Former KGB agent and defector Yuri Bezmenov warned in an interview linked more than 30 years ago about the feminist and Marxist takeover of our institutions and the ideological subversion of Western democracy. He made some very eerie predictions that help explain today's society. Controlling the education system is key. He discusses the 4 stages of the takeover of society by the far left in the interview. Those are demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. He explains the first stage, which is called demoralization. This involves indoctrinating multiple generations of students in far-left ideology in the education system. From there, these people infect the government, academia, corporations, and our institutions, and then spread far-left ideology within these organizations. He explains how the brainwashing occurring in the education system corrupts people's perception to the point where they cannot make logical sense of information. After years of indoctrination, their thinking is bounded within an ideological framework, and they cannot see beyond that framework. Sound familiar? It should. Yuri was explaining what modern Western society would become 30 years ago. Think of all the revelations that have come out on the working environments of employees in the tech sector and in academia, and the disruptive and violent protests on university campuses. Number 9, gynocentric superorganisms. Related to the previous reason behind why gynocentrism is normalized is the influence of superorganisms on society and how they have succumbed to gynocentrism. MRA blogger Angry Harry did an excellent series looking at the impact of superorganisms on human behavior and how powerful they are in shaping it. See Angry Harry's MRA Corner on AVFM, linked, and check out the 4-part series titled Those Who Rule Over Us. Superorganisms in the social context can be thought of as entities comprised of thousands, sometimes millions and even billions of individuals that appear to mimic the properties of a living organism and wield enormous influence on society. Religions, governments, corporations, institutions, and cities are examples of superorganisms. People, in this context, can be considered cells of these superorganisms. If we look at human civilization as a superorganism, the slogan, "Feminism is cancer," is quite fitting. Gynocentrism can be thought of in the context of superorganisms as the underlying germ of a disease of the superorganism. It infects the healthy human cells of the superorganism and then spreads throughout the superorganism. Eventually, the superorganism succumbs to gynocentrism and then infects other superorganisms. Feminism could be considered a vector of the gynocentric germ that helps it spread, like how a mosquito is a vector of malaria. Superorganisms, as Angry Harry explained, have enormous influence over our society and the individual behavior of people. Corporations, governments, religion, and institutions shape the way of life for billions of people. Gynocentrism has infested many of these superorganisms and turned them into gynocentric zombies. These infected entities can and have inflicted terrible damage on society. Think of the impact feminist-infested universities have had on society. Think of the impact the gynocentric legal system has had on the nuclear family, fathers, and the lives of men. Think of the impact the feminized education system has had on the boy crisis in education. Think of the impact the gynocentric bias on the tech sector has had on the information that the public is exposed to and their censorship and filtering of alternative, non-gynocentric viewpoints. Number 10. Learned helplessness and the self-fulfilling prophecy of gynocentrism. Men and boys in today's society to a substantial degree are exhibiting signs of learned helplessness. Many men and boys have essentially been conditioned to accept that gynocentrism is normal and inescapable. Once men and boys internalize that dangerous false belief, they accept their own marginalization and disposability every day, and in doing so enable gynocentrism to have almost complete dominance over society. Learned helplessness has been linked to depression, linked, and is no doubt a major factor driving the epidemic of male suicide. Learned helplessness fuels a self-fulfilling prophecy. If men and boys believe there's no other way to live, then gynocentrism becomes inevitable, and this fate then reinforces the belief that gave rise to it. Beliefs can be very destructive things when they go unquestioned, leading to highly destructive outcomes. Men going their own way, MGTOW, is a pathway out of gynocentrism for men. It involves unlearning pathological gynocentric beliefs and daring to believe that there's another way to live. Whilst it may not be easy to go against the social current of our society, it is possible, and once the rewards of going your way become clear, it becomes easier and easier and easier to go your own way. We are social creatures, and part of overcoming learned helplessness for men involves abandoning concern for social ostracism, particularly from women, and learning how to identify and manage risks that a predatory gynocentric society permits so you can live your life in your own way and avoid entrapment and attack. Men and boys are punished for performing and exhibiting their natural masculine nature and at the same time ridiculed for failing to perform and demonstrate a masculine nature. At the same time that men are told they must live up to the hypergamous expectations of women to earn more money than their female counterparts in order to be worthy of a relationship with women, they are cast as privileged oppressors and blamed for the gender pay gap if they do earn more money than women. Men are told they're losers if they do not perform, and then they are told they are privileged oppressors when they do perform. Women will write articles about where are all the good men, and then write other articles about the gender wage gap and how we need female quotas in upper management and corporate boards because of male privilege. It's a double bind. Men have no escape from social ostracism if they follow external societal pressures and succumb to herd mentality and social pressure to conform. Such men must accept the message from society that they are inferior, violent, privileged, and evil oppressors. MGTOW is the healthy alternative. MGTOW involves finding your own way in life, independent of what culture or society or women expect of you or what they think of you. MGTOW is the only way out for men from the gynocentric prison society has been turned into. To borrow a line from the Shawshank Redemption, you either get busy living or get busy dying. The biases in human perception, thinking, and behavior discussed, combined with the changes in family structure, the proliferation of superstimuli with mass communication, and the influence of gynocentric institutions, media, and authority figures, keep the silent killer that is gynocentrism from being detected and addressed by civilization and by individuals. To fight this, we need to develop greater self-awareness in society and awareness of what gynocentrism is and the harms it can and does cause. We need organized resistance to gynocentrism to emerge at the individual level of men going their own way and at the collective level of well-funded and well-organized men's movement to tackle institutionalized and legalized gynocentrism. Either we address gynocentrism or the harsh forces of natural selection will remove gynocentric behavior from the human evolutionary lineage, or worse, put the entire human race into the fossil record. For the superorganisms of society, they either rid themselves of gynocentrism or look forward to bankruptcy or collapse. For the individual man, you either overcome gynocentrism or you suffer for it and in some cases lose everything, including your life. It is our choice. We can either do this the easy way or the hard way individually and as a society. It takes discipline to recondition ourselves out of bad habits and develop the self-awareness to recognize and stop bad behaviors. It does not happen overnight. Websites like A Voice for Men, men's discussion and support groups, and male-friendly life coaches and mental health professionals can help with the process. MGTOW helps in a big way in overcoming gynocentrism. MGTOW is grounded on the fundamental principle of self-control. You cannot go your own way without it. MGTOW and its continued growth is direct proof that it is possible for men to overcome years of gynocentric programming, instinctual and emotional impulses, and take the red pill. But like I said, nothing happens overnight. That goes for individual change and also for societal change. Just because change is slow, though, does not mean change is impossible or will not eventually lead to profound shifts in people's lives and the way society functions. Every journey begins with a single first step. It is time men broke free of their psychological bondage and dared to recognize and accept their true intrinsic value in the face of a gynocentric society that would prefer they did not. It is not just biology at play when we're talking about gynocentrism. Social, political, institutional, economic, informational, and cultural factors are also involved in normalizing the societal pathology we call gynocentrism. We are indeed living in the matrix of gynocentrism. Most people are still asleep in the matrix. We need to stop normalizing gynocentrism by addressing the 10 causes responsible for its normalization discussed earlier. MGTOW and a well-funded and organized men's movement would go a long way to achieving that objective. We are at a critical period in human civilization where we need to move beyond outmoded gynocentric ways of thinking and behaving if we expect civilization to survive. Technology cannot be uninvented, and we cannot return to a traditional path. Simply ending feminism will not be sufficient to advance society either. Gynocentrism has now become an unsustainable problem for society. Tens of thousands of years ago, when we humans transitioned from a hunter-gatherer existence to a primitive civilization, the dynamics between the sexes changed. Now we face a similar challenge to change those dynamics again, as a result of rapid technological change over the last 2 centuries. Dr. Warren Farrell has in the past described the need for a gender transition movement to recognize and address this reality. The Kardashev scale, linked, lays out the stage of technological advancement of civilizations. Human civilization is currently undergoing a transition from a Type 0 civilization to a Type 1 civilization in which we control all the energy available on the planet and coming from the parent star. Currently, we can only make use of a fraction of the energy available. Technologies of a Type 1 civilization include nuclear fusion and renewable energy on a larger scale, the capacity to produce large quantities of antimatter, etc. Some of these technologies we have obtained, some we are on the cusp of, and other technology is still quite far away. In several decades, if everything goes right, we may have a permanent, sizable, and self-sustaining settlement on Mars. All of this civilizational advancement requires a society that remains socially stable, free, safe, educated, and prosperous enough to permit the required technological progress to occur and to ensure the technology is not used to destroy ourselves. The relationship between men and women forms the backbone of the family, and the family forms the backbone of society. Gynocentrism is now threatening to destroy the backbone of the family and of society. We need to wake up. Otherwise, the future for humanity is looking bleak. External threats like nuclear weapons appear to be well recognized. The same does not seem to apply for gynocentrism and the scale of the threat it poses for the continued existence of human civilization. This needs to change. And that concludes the essay by the AntiGynocentrist on the normalization of gynocentrism. I think a brilliant piece of writing, and I can't end this without expressing my sincere thanks for his efforts. I found the piece incisive and highly thought-provoking, but aside from that, I'm a huge fan of the subtext that flowed throughout this effort, that being that the onus is on men to accept that they can and should take responsibility for effecting change. Certainly, defeating gynocentrism on a societal level is a daunting task, and it is debatable on whether it will happen in time to prevent the inevitable crash. That, in my opinion, is such a given that we've even have a segment of the red pill community rooting for that collapse, seeing it as a necessary evil before real change is possible. I'm not here to support or condemn that mentality, but I will say that I think this essay confirms one of my core beliefs about the lives of men, in that the responsibility to rid their lives of all the sick effects of gynocentrism is entirely on them. There are no victims, just volunteers. We live and die by our choices in life, and practicing gynocentrism is a choice. Whether social collapse is avoidable or not, personal collapse certainly is avoidable. Personal destruction at the hands of women in a gynocentric world is a self-inflicted demise. Gents, to whatever degree it is possible in your lives, go your own way. If anyone gets in your way, run them over. It's the only way this gynocentric world won't take you down. And that's it for my final thoughts on this subject. I leave you with the invitation to support this channel and all the critical information for men contained here by visiting the links below to the Patreon and or to the donation and subscription links. Your help, and only your help, is what keeps the Red Pill wisdom coming at you here. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.